boss.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. Greg Stanton is the mayor of a big Sunbelt city in a very red state. I think if we were going to name it on a paint chip palette, we'd say late August and tomato red. Bill, of course, was a centrist Republican governor in the People's Republic of Massachusetts. I know people some progressives out there are going to hear, centrist Republican. There's a little like heart-shaped thought bubble in their head thinking, wow, I would even date one now. But you've each had very impressive legislative successes. Bill, the Education Reform Act, pro-charter legislation in a House and Senate dominated by Democrats and the teachers union. Greg, you've passed a very liberal anti-discrimination ordinance, very well received by LGBT community, municipal IDs. Also, you got that going in a pretty hostile environment. I want you to take us through some of these successes, how you've got them done at a very granular level. It's a how-to in a way for folks out there who are trying to do the same kind of work.
I guess I'll jump in first. Just say it's an honor to be here and be honored to be on the stage with Governor Weld. I had a chance to talk in the green room, and he's now my favorite libertarian. I just want to say that. Look, when you're mayor of a big city, and Phoenix is now the 5th largest city in America. We just passed up Philadelphia, if you can believe that, in terms of population. And so we're the fastest growing big city, very diverse, a growing Latino population. In fact, we're soon to be a majority Latino population. So as mayor of that city, of course, I'm a homer, but I think as Phoenix goes, so goes the future of America, because we look like the future of America. And when it comes to running a city, the whole point of this conversation is about bipartisanship, working with the other side. But the reality is, as mayors, you just got to get stuff done. So you got to work with whoever will work with you to pass good, strong public policy that's going to advance your economy. So when it comes to things like human rights policy, non-discrimination ordinances, when it comes to things like supporting your refugee community or supporting your Latino community or supporting a better relationship with Mexico than Arizona traditionally has had. That's what you got to do to build a stronger economy. So you work with whoever's going to work with you. Sometimes it's Democrats, sometimes it's Republicans. One of our biggest successes early on as mayor was when our hospitals tried to get through our state legislature a hospital bed tax so that they could take advantage of full Medicaid funding, because they were getting hammered by uncompensated costs within those hospital systems. Some of them were almost going to go bankrupt. Because the legislature is so conservative and afraid that it was going to be a quote-unquote tax increase on their political records, they wouldn't do it. So the hospitals came to City of Phoenix and said, would you pass an ordinance for a hospital bed tax? And my attitude was, yeah, why not? Let's give it a shot. We did it. In Washington, D.C., they did approve the deal, and so our hospitals were able to recover over $300 million. Hospitals that even were thinking about, were financially struggling and thinking about even potentially closing, were able to stay open. And oh, by the way, our Republican governor then used that model that we had done in the city of Phoenix as the statewide model, and Arizona actually did pass Medicaid expansion. So we were actually used as kind of a laboratory, a good public policy laboratory that was a successful model for our conservative state because it was good for business.
Bill, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the Education Reform Act and how you got that done.
All my dealings with the legislature, I think, involved as much style and procedure as they did substance, Education Reform Act being no exception there. So I came into office in the 90s, and the legislative leadership was not only all Democratic, it was all urban Democratic, Boston, 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 and my base was in the suburbs. So we had nothing politically in common, and in fact, my preparation for being governor was to indict and convict Democrats in public corruption cases in Massachusetts, of which I had 111 when I was a federal prosecutor before becoming governor. So needless to say, I was regarded with deep suspicion in the legislature starting out. And we got off on the wrong foot in that my shibboleth had been, let's cut taxes, and the leadership in the legislature is very fond of taxes and the revenue that they represent. So I called the House into session, said, pass this tax cut. They said, the hell with you, buddy. So I held a press conference. I said, you can lead the House to order, but you can't make it think. That did not go down well in the House. So some mutual friends of the House Speaker and myself who were in the press called us up off the record said, this is not good for general business. You guys got to, you know, you both live in Cambridge. Why don't you go have breakfast at the Charles Hotel in Bury? So we did that, and that led to my one major innovation, which came to be called the Tea and Cookies meeting. So I had this breakfast with the speaker. I said, you know, this has been fun. We should do this again, like maybe once a week. So we agreed.
And who was the speaker?
Charlie Flaherty was the speaker.
And you had a great relationship also with Bill Bulger, right?
Well, I had tremendous relationship
We'll
with
talk
Bulger.
about that.
Bulger was a social conservative, economic conservative. Flaherty was a social liberal, economic liberal. I won a lot of 2-1 arguments. So we went to Bulger and said, let's get together at 3:15 every Monday, which gave me time to get in my squash game before the meeting.
Very important.
And we did that for 7 years that I was governor. It's been followed by every governor and legislative leadership since then, once a week. Republican, Democrat, Republican, Democrat. And it works well.
Same menu.
The menu, frankly, is jokes. It's not substantive. It's to talk about what a jerk everybody in the State House who doesn't happen to be in that room is. And produces much mirth. But the theory is it's harder to stab somebody in the back or the front if you know you're going to be sitting with them within the next 7 days in a very jocular setting.
Right.
So that really did work. And on the education reform bill, I had Tom Birmingham was then president of the Senate and saw things exactly eye to eye as I did. Mark Roosevelt was leading the effort in the House. He would run against me in '94, so he was no political pal of mine, but he was actually pretty good on the education issue also. So we did a grand bargain, put in massive more amounts of funding, which I wanted to do because I didn't want some court telling me how to appropriate the money.
And you mainly wanted more rigorous standards?
I wanted more standards. I got some management givebacks and some more rigorous standards, high stakes testing in 4th, 8th, and 10th grade in return for all this money.
And charters?
I got some charter schools, yeah. But mainly I was secretly on the Democrat side because the amount of money in Wellesley for the public schools was triple the amount of money in Dorchester, Roxbury, and Mattapan. And I knew damn well that it was not going to be long before a court told me to switch that. So I was secretly on their side. So that's how the Education Act happened.
That's how that happened. And Greg, why don't you talk a little bit about how you got municipal IDs? Because you sold it in a way that really kind of bypassed immigration to get the Republicans on board.
Sure, municipal ID is a controversial issue because it does provide a city identification for anybody living in the city of Phoenix, regardless of immigration status. Our state legislature had passed a law saying that our police department or any other department couldn't accept the Mexican ID. And so citizens or people living in the city of Phoenix who wanted to use, say, a park center or a community center or a senior center needed to have some form of identification. So the point we made was, if you live in the city of Phoenix, we want you to participate in the community. We want you to go to the local library. We want you to come to the local community center. And so we did pass municipal ID under the argument that we just want people participating in our community. We didn't really get involved in the immigration-related issues. I'll let other people debate that. I want a community that's as welcoming for as many people as possible. If you're living in the city of Phoenix, we want you invested in the future of the community. So municipal ID was simply a way to provide a system so that as many people as possible could become actively involved in the city of Phoenix. I want those young people at our libraries or park centers, et cetera. It's a good thing for the future of our city. That's how we sold it, and so far so good. Our legislature did try to preempt us and ban municipal ID.
I think the preemption statute in Arizona is quite dramatic, and I think maybe you should explain how it works.
Well, I think, preemption of cities by state legislatures is going on around the country. There's a lot of kind of more conservative interest groups that generally feel like they've got more power at state legislatures and cities are too progressive, and so they're trying to do that. Well, in Arizona, we passed the mother of all preemption laws. Our state legislature said that if the city of Phoenix or any other city in the state were to pass an ordinance that they feel violates state law, we would lose all of our state share revenue. That's $400 million to the city of Phoenix. So it's not just banning the particular ordinance, it's actually taking a significant chunk of our of our annual budget away from us. You know what we've done? We keep acting the same as we ever did. We passed municipal ID and said it's the right thing to do. They tried to preempt us and make it in violation of state law. And it was really the business community that said, this is good, smart public policy for a city like Phoenix. It is good human rights policy, and it's good policy to have as many people involved as possible. So it failed, the preemption bill failed by 1 vote, and we're able to move forward with municipal ID in the city of Phoenix.
I want to talk a little bit about adaptability, and there are instances where you do have to, obviously have to compromise, you have to really change your mind. And Bill, you did it with gun control in the early 90s. You really shifted positions, and some people, critics said, oh, it's just political expediency, and I remember a spokesman at the time said, crime in cities is really changing. And tell us about how you came around to that, and also about, because one of the themes of this conference is bridging the urban-rural divide, is you come in, you want to tighten the budget, you end up spending a lot of money to build Mass MoCA, which is a fantastic museum in northern Massachusetts, bringing jobs to rural areas. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got to those places?
Well, I think you got to look at the conditions on the ground. As Maynard Keynes said, when the facts change, I change my opinion. What do you do? Cuts pretty deep. But if I could tell another war story to give you a sense of the dynamic of how I prospered in a very urban environment. So Bill Bulger was the president of the Senate. The image was he was an Irish ward healer.
And the brother of somebody legendary.
The brother of Whitey Bulger, whom I had indicted on drug charges back in the 80s, but the FBI tipped him off and he fled and was the longest running fugitive. So in many ways, Bill Bulger was my natural enemy. However, he's a very erudite, educated man, knows his Latin, knows his Greek, knows his history. I also majored in Latin and Greek at college. As time wore on, we in fact began speaking Latin and Greek to each other at our weekly meetings with the speaker, Charlie Flaherty, just to drive him crazy. But so I went to Bulger, and he'd had a long-running gun battle with Governor Dukakis, my former law partner, who immediately preceded me. And the Dukakis folks didn't like Bulger on style grounds. So they knew what his priorities were: the Boston Symphony, the Boston Public Library, the L Street Bathhouse on Carson Beach in South Boston, and they made sure that those appropriations were vetoed every year. And they were short money, $1 million here, $2 million there, maybe $11 million there. So I go to Bulger, and the governor has to file House 1, which is the governor's budget, at the beginning of every session. And Bulger always had to scrap and take heat for putting his stuff in. So I said, Mr. President, how about this year we do it different? I'll file House 1, and instead of $2 million for the symphony, I'll put in $18 million. And instead of $1.5 million for the library, I'll put in $12.6. And the L Street Bathhouse, I'm going to have a special section for totally renovating and upgrading not only the L Street Bathhouse, but all the areas around it, and canoes, and the Carson Beach is going to be a pleasure land. How would that be? And he said, well, Governor, that would be marvelous. And he waited, and I knew he was waiting for me to ask for something. And I didn't ask for anything, because this was short money. So I was biding my time. And that little chicken came home to roost 3 years later, when after the 94 election, so I'd won 71% on the re-elect. I was in a strong position. I go to the Senate President and the Speaker, still the same people. I say, look, there's been a lot of talk in the legislature about possibly a legislative pay raise. I happen to know you guys are both for that. What I didn't tell them is that I was, again, secretly also for it. In fact, I'd written a piece in, I think, the Times with Barney Frank, saying members of Congress should be paid $150,000, but let's cut down the outside income. And I didn't want the members of the legislature in Massachusetts to be either Democrats right out of college who'd never held another job, or rich Republicans with a law practice or an insurance business. Nobody knew anything about how the world worked, but if you pay them more, you can attract better people to the legislature. So the thinking went, and I believed in that. But I didn't tell Bulger and Flaherty that. I said, I'm willing, I'll tell you what, I know you care about that, so I'll go with you on this legislative pay raise. In fact, I will introduce it and take all the heat. And all you have to do is say, well, okay, big redheaded kid wants a pay raise. I guess we gotta pass a pay raise. So that worked for them. I said, but there is something I do care about. And they said, what's that? And I said, the long-term capital gains tax. And they again said, what's that? They had no idea what the long-term capital gains tax was. It just wasn't, their constituents didn't worry about that.
Right.
But mine did.
Yeah, the squash players.
So I said, look, long-term capital gains tax, it's 6%. Why don't we knock 1% off it for every year you hold the asset? So if it's like a house or a family farm, in 6 years, it's gone. And what I didn't say is that also applies to Krugerrands and other assets. But they said, well, whatever that means, that sounds good to us. So we passed that. But it was not a compromise. It was a deal. And that's another way to get there from here.
Interesting. And Greg, where do you feel like you've bought, political capital? And also we talked a little about how you've been building a better alliance with rural communities with resource conservation.
Well, sure, that's a huge issue, obviously, across America. With this last election, rural versus urban, are we at war with each other, something like that? I can tell you in my city, obviously Phoenix is the biggest city in Arizona, one of the biggest in the United States of America. Our metropolitan area makes up about 60% of the state of Arizona. But when it comes to water conservation, which in these times of drought out in the desert Southwest is a huge issue, we can't do right by the future of Phoenix water users, by the city of Phoenix, unless we partner with our rural areas. So I've put together a coalition of mayors from both rural and urban, Democrat, Republican, and we're doing system conservation on the Salt and Verde rivers, which is a big part of our water supply system. Oh, by the way, we're also partnering with our Native American communities. Phoenix is surrounded by large Native American communities. Many of those tribal communities have large water rights that we're going to need to partner with them. So we're building those relationships now. We're actually storing Phoenix water in aquifers on Native American land right now, which is actually a very innovative thing for us to be doing. It's never been done before. And we're partnering with the city of Tucson, our bigger city in southern Arizona, where we're also storing water in aquifers down there. So Phoenix has to be partnering with just about everyone if we're going to solve this long-term drought issue that we've been suffering from in Arizona 14 years now. On the issue of political capital, look, I'm a big believer that you try to build up political capital by being a popular mayor, and you use that political capital for the betterment of your city. I put on the ballot 2 years ago, on my own re-election ballot, so I was on the ballot as well, a tax increase for transportation infrastructure investment. And believe it or not, Phoenix, Arizona passed at the time the largest transportation infrastructure investment in the United States of America, a 35-year, $32 billion investment in transportation. We tripled the amount of light rail, massively improved bus system, made 1,000 miles of bike lanes, improved dial-a-ride services for people with disabilities so they can have mobility independence, made the city of Phoenix a much more walkable city. If you could imagine the city of Phoenix, which is considered kind of the most car-centric suburban sprawl city in America in so many ways, is going urban in a huge way. And it's in large part because of these investments that we have made. And the first line under this new investment is going to go into South Phoenix, which is our poorest part of the city, where we have the highest percentage of Latinos and African Americans. And we sold it by saying, look, for the city of Phoenix to thrive, we need all citizens to have opportunities. We need to connect citizens of South Phoenix to higher education opportunities in downtown Phoenix or at Arizona State University's main campus in Tempe, or Grand Canyon University, which is in the western part of the city. You need to connect people to education or employment centers or to healthcare centers, et cetera. And the citizens of Phoenix overwhelmingly, they reelected me, thank goodness, and they passed this infrastructure investment. That took a lot of political capital to do, but you know what? If you're in the political business, what are you there for? You've got political capital, use it.
Ginia, can I just say, I very much agree with the mayor that it's important for a good leader, a wise leader, a strong leader, to not only build up political capital, as obviously I was trying to do with Bulger, but to use it. I think one of the most important things that a good leader can do is to unleash the energies of every segment of the community, sort of what you were just saying. So I had a Hispanic American commission, the top 30 or 40 people in the state, Asian American, African American, and the same thing on the business side. The top 30 execs in telecom, in software, in biotech, met with them all every month. What do you need? What do you need? Anything you need, you can have, so far as within my gift or power. And virtually everything was back in back in the 90s, a tax credit for industry or some law respecting rights of Asians in some context. It all happened, and so everybody felt they had a stake, which is what the mayor is saying, and he's absolutely right.
And this is a question to both of you. Is there what was the compromise too far? Is there something you regret and wish you had done really differently?
No, go ahead. I'm trying to think of one.
I'm still in the middle of my term, so I'll have to have you do that deep thinking, all that deep thinking later on. In the city of Phoenix, you asked earlier about how you've sort of changed or learned over time. The sweet spot for us, for me, has been to be very pro-business and pro-people. Good, strong, progressive policies on human rights policies, public transportation, refugee, building a better relationship with Mexico. I've been to Mexico 18 times as mayor, taking business delegations down there because Phoenix had to flip the script, if you will, with our very negative relationship with Mexico. We're a border state, and that's actually one of our biggest economic advantages because Mexico is growing at a very fast pace. They're building a strong middle class there, and we had kind of turned our back on Mexico. So by building a better relationship with your local Latino community, including your immigrant community, and taking business delegations to Mexico, we flipped the script. But one area where I learned a lot was the need on the building permit system, something as basic as that.
Right.
It was taking too darn long for businesses to get permits through the city of Phoenix, one of the most basic functions. And there may have been lots of quote unquote good reasons for that. We got a double, triple, quadruple check to make sure that buildings are as safe as possible. But at the end of the day, I had to come to realization that much of it was just taking time for time's sake. It was too bureaucratic. And we blew that system out. And now in the city of Phoenix, if you're getting a basic permit, a non-life safety issue for a building, you can do it in 24 hours. And for major companies that are moving to either city.
In New York, it takes about 7.5 years.
Yeah.
So.
We can get if a major employer is coming to the city, you can get through that process in a matter of just a few months. And I'll tell you what, our buildings, as far as I'm told, they're just as safe as they were otherwise, but most importantly, we've become a very attractive community for investment as a result. And for a Democratic mayor of a big city, particularly in a red state like Arizona, that's the sweet spot. Be as pro-business as possible and be as pro-people as possible. Send that message that everyone is welcome in the city, particularly new investment in your city.
I thought of one.
Just one.
So I sank very deep shafts in two areas of social policy. One was gay and lesbian rights, and set up a commission on gay and lesbian youth, and appointment of judges, executive orders, et cetera, et cetera. And the other was reproductive rights and very strong, protection of clinics for abortion rights for women. And Cardinal Law, who was the head of the diocese at that point, of course, is way on the other side of those.
Right.
And we had some background.
Hugely powerful.
We were in the same house at college. But I made no effort to meet him halfway because I regard those as absolutes. And I'm not sure that was best in the long run, but it's just stuck in my craw. I couldn't do it. And I think when something sticks in your craw and you just can't make any effort, that's probably not a good thing. I'm not sure that I could have done it any other way, but I'm not sure it was the best course.
Just to speak about the current moment in Washington, I think a lot of people will say, there are no Bill Weld Republicans anymore. We're too extreme. We're at such odds. We can't have this kind of workmanship anymore. Certainly, that's a mantra. And Bill, how true do you think that is? What is your feeling about that?
Well, I don't really agree with that. I mean, I think, again, further to what the mayor was saying, if a strong leader wants to stick to position and try and better the lot of the people that he or she represents, that doesn't give the opposition much to shoot at. I think about the healthcare issue. I think some things are pretty obvious. You want to control costs, and everybody wants to control costs. Okay, you're not going to control costs if you have people bleeding out of the system. And a 28-year-old bartender who's making $75,000 a year is never going to go pay for insurance. So all those people will not be in the system. Say what you will about Obamacare. It added 20 million people to the rolls. So the idea of not having an individual mandate is a non-starter for me. The automobile insurance precedent carries the day. So, you know, I think sometimes it is possible, as David Hume would say, to derive an ought from an is, to look at conditions on the ground and say, if you're in politics, holding that office confers on you a moral imperative to do something about the problems. And if we can get together and agree on where we want to go, we really should be able to get to agreement on a lot of the steps to get there. So I think this thing, oh, we just can't deal with each other, I can't talk to the younger generation. Baloney, it's a cop-out.
This is good segue because I want Greg, because I think it's probably 129 degrees in Phoenix today, so that takes us to climate change, and we're going to talk about this in a later session, but mayors around the country are obviously forging their own sort of shadow path. What are you guys doing?
Sure, and similar to last question, look, Washington is broken right now.
Right.
Poll after poll shows that. Obviously, there's a lot of dysfunction in the White House, a lot of bizarre activities, but even before that, Washington was not getting much done because of the polarity of what was going on. So Washington is not getting much done, it's not very popular. Even state houses around the country, very much the same thing.
Right.
I think cities are still viewed as the last functional forms of government where you can actually get things done. One example of that is climate change. When the president did pull the United States out of the Paris Agreement, not only do I think it was a terrible choice by the president from climate change policy, I think in terms of hurting our standing on a global stage, it really has hurt the United States. That being said, mayors across the United States have stepped up and said, the president's going to pull out, we're going to sign on behalf of the United States, because 80% of American citizens live in cities. And for a city like Phoenix, this is not a matter of international affairs. This is a local issue. Extreme heat that you're reading about in Arizona, the forest fires that you're reading about in Arizona, the drought conditions that we talked about earlier, all are a direct result of climate change and climate change issues. So I make it a local issue. This is not about, you know, Paris, France, and what was signed there. This is about, I've got to do right by the citizens of Phoenix right now to do my part in fighting climate change. And what we're doing in the city of Phoenix, we're changing all 100,000 of our streetlights to LED. We've got the largest fleet of alternative fuel vehicles in the United States of America is in Phoenix, Arizona, 32 megawatts of solar. We're partnering with Arizona State University, their Global Institute of Sustainability, and we actually have a co-working center at one of our transfer stations where we bring the city, ASU, and private sector entrepreneurs on site at something called the Resource Innovation Campus. And those private sector entrepreneurs tell us stuff that's going into our landfill that shouldn't be going into landfill. There's actually a marketplace for. We actually, palm fronds, we have tons of palm trees in Arizona. We could throw tons of palm fronds into the landfill. Well, now we're taking all those out. There's actually a $10 million a year business in palm fronds, grinding up into animal feed. So actually our most innovative department is our public works department. And you know, you think about co-working and incubators and that sort of thing. We actually have our most innovative incubator is at a City of Phoenix transfer station where we normally take the garbage, is where we're getting some of our most innovative ideas. It's what we owe future generations. And mayors across America are going to lead the way as the United States will meet its obligations under the Paris Agreement, but using the mayors as a platform, not the White House.
Okay, I know we're going to have a lot of questions. So let's take some from the audience.
From the audience, and just a reminder, everyone, we're taking questions online as well. You can send them to q@nytimes.com. But let's start with a question from the audience. No, you're not a shy group. All right, we'll go to the computer first. Bill Weld, based on your experience last fall, what kind of future do you see for third parties?
Well, the mayor and I were talking about that. I'm still a libertarian, and I've always considered myself a small L libertarian. And it did lie in my mind last year that when the Whig Party split in the 1850s, the know-nothing segment of the Whig Party spiraled into oblivion, but the other section of the Whig Party, a third party, became known as the Republican Party, and 4 years later elected Abraham Lincoln. So I do have some hope for third parties. I think the Libertarian Party might be a vehicle for the advancement of ideas. The Republican Party advanced a very handy idea called the abolition of slavery. So, you know, mighty oaks from little acorns can grow.
And we have a question about the media. seems to be a hot topic these days. How does the media help or hurt your efforts to work with the other side?
Yeah.
The answer is yes. I mean, you know, obviously, the insanity of what we see out of the White House complaining about the media every day. I mean, grow up. If you're in a political office, you're going to get tough media. That's just part of the business. And so you do your best part to hopefully put forward good, strong public policy. You make the best case you can. Sometimes you'll get supported by the media. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes your motives are questioned, et cetera. But that's the nature of being in political office. If you didn't want to sign up for that level of inquiry, you should have signed up for another job. That's why I think the thin-skinnedness that we see out of the White House right now is just unbelievable to me. Anyone who's been in an elected office, anyone who's been in a leadership position is used to scrutiny. So the media is the media. They've got a role to play. You have to accept that role. Sometimes they're fair. Sometimes they're unfair. Hopefully on balance, you get it right. Man, I got hammered for my first couple years in office because of public pensions and the difficulty of dealing with public pensions, which we actually did pass some good, strong reform in the city of Phoenix. I thought it was unfair, but you know what? You do what's right. You push forward with good, strong public policies, and you live with the media that you get. I mean, there's no use complaining about it. It's part of the job.
Your take?
So I came up as a public prosecutor, and my job was to tear down the temple walls, which is also the job. You can think of the job of the media as tearing down the temple walls or picking the fleas off the dog, but it's sort of what I was doing. So I regarded the press as my natural allies, and they exercise a cleansing function. I read 40 pieces from the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal online before I get out of bed in the morning. So I pretty well have my worldview shaped by the time I brush my teeth, and I'm glad of it.
Right here. And please feel free to introduce yourself.
Thank you. I'm Jerry Moyo. I'm the mayor of West Palm Beach, Florida. And Mayor Stanton, I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about your municipal ID and how you implemented that.
Okay, great. So we passed it as a public policy just last year. So we are in the process of implementing it. We've worked with a third-party entity that operates municipal ID in Oakland and some other in other cities. To be perfectly frank, the third party owns all the information. The city of Phoenix does not want to own that private information. So we work with the third party. I will be honest with you, many in the immigrant community that was asking for a municipal ID are now very concerned. We passed that public policy during a past White House administration. Many are concerned about whether or not they're going to be seeking access to that information. So to be honest, there's a little bit of trepidation about moving forward, and they don't want to move forward until there's absolutely sure that their personal information, which inevitably has to be given over in order to receive the municipal ID, will end up in hands that they don't want to end up in. We did pass, obviously mentioned earlier, the political hurdle of our friends of the state legislature trying to preempt us and not allow us to do it. We did pass that hurdle. Now we have to implement it in a way where everyone feels confident the right thing will occur.
That's great. I saw a question on the aisle over there. Please.
Craig Lesser with the Georgia Municipal Association. Mr. Mayor, you've talked about some of the great successes you've had in Phoenix. Would you talk about some of the things that are particularly vexing to you right now? And two, very quickly, what's different in your mind from when you were campaigning to be mayor and now that you're mayor?
All right, first, give my best to Mayor Kasim Reed, a great mayor in Atlanta there. Look, what's vexing to me right now, look, in Arizona, on a bipartisan way, we had passed the famous SB 1070. We turned our back on our friends in Mexico, despite the fact that that's an economic giant, and building a more innovative export-based economy is what every city across the United States of America needs to do if you're going to move forward in this hyper-competitive international economy, just like the city of Atlanta and other cities in Georgia are doing. Now our current governor, Governor Ducey, a Republican, is actually strong on this issue. He's been down to Mexico as well. We have really turned the corner in that regard. And now comes the president. He's talking about building a wall and other very self-defeating public policies that would send us spiraling in the wrong direction when it comes to our relationship with Mexico. That is unbelievably frustrating. There's talk about elimination of NAFTA and free trade with Mexico. That would be very damaging to the Arizona economy, where 100,000 jobs at least are directly tied to our relationship with Mexico. And in terms of running for office, look, I served in the city council for many years. So I kind of knew the gig. I knew exactly what I was running for. It is a bizarre thing about American politics that the skill set that it takes to be a good candidate for office are often the very opposite skills that you need to be a good leader while in public office. But I feel like I kind of knew that balance going in, and hopefully both a strong candidate and a strong leader while in office. I appreciate the question.
Thank you. It was a wonderful panel. Thank you all. Thank you.
We're done. All right. I'll follow you.